Now we're going to look at the Vlookup function. The Vlookup function is the traditional workhorse of looking up data in Excel. It's been around the longest and used the most extensively, so you're really very likely to see it in models that you look through in the future. So that's why it's really important to know Vlookup, even though XLOOKUP is a more modern and better version of Vlookup. Even index match could be argued as being a better option than Vlookup, but in either case, XLOOKUP really dominates at this point, so we're going to use XLOOKUP going forward. But again, you need to know what Vlookup it is, why it's being used in the past, and how it works to be able to use those models and adapt them. So Vlookup, let's start typing it and we'll see what we get for the arguments. The first thing, just like with XLOOKUP, is what do you want to look up? So in this case, we want to look up that borrower ID. And notice here, I didn't actually lock the borrower ID in the last videos. It's always good practice if you have a constant input that's not going to move that you go ahead and lock that. All right, so now where Vlookup differs from index match or from XLOOKUP is now we're going to specify just one array. We have a table array is what it asks for. And so the table array has to include both the lookup data, what we want to reference, and then whatever we want back, kind of the data that we're getting back that we're interested in. So in this case, we have to include the borrower ID as well as, say, the loan amount and the loan status that we're going to be interested in. So that whole array, or that whole table, has to include our lookup values, borrower IDs, and what information we want back. Always remember to lock that because usually your data is not moving. Now, the third argument is call index num. And so that's the column index num. And that tells it what data do you want back. For example, if I put a column index of 1 in, that tells it that I want the first column of data. And what that means is, and what's important here is that it always looks for your borrower ID or the lookup value in that first column of the table array. So in this case, it would be looking for the borrower ID in that first column, and once it finds it, it's then going to return the information in column 1 in that same row. So it finds the row first, and then it returns either the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. value of that table array. All right, so in this case, if I had it give me back the 1, the first column, it's going to give me right back my borrower ID. So let's see that real quick, and I'll talk about that last argument in just a second. All right, so in this case, it's 76,352. Notice it's formatted as $1. That's just from what we were doing in the last exercise, but it's getting the right number back for us. All right, so it's doing the first column. Now we can change that. Let's make it, instead of a 1, a 2. That means it's going to give me the second column of data, which in this case should be the name Claire. So here we see Claire. If we want the third column, we change that to a 3, and we get her state of Alabama. If we did the fourth column, now we should get the loan amount. And finally, the fifth column is going to give us the loan status. So using that third argument, or the column index num, controls which data we get back from the function. Now that last argument is the range lookup. And what range lookup really is do you want to do exact matching, like we've been doing both with match and with XLOOKUP, or do you want to do approximate matching? In this case, just the default is true. And so that true means approximate matching. That's just how they've defined it. False means exact matching. So for the time being, we're going to want to use false exclusively. So we're only using false for the time being. We'll get to how true works a little bit later on. So we put false in, and there we get our answer on time. Importantly, you don't want to leave this last argument out. If you leave that false out, oftentimes you will get an answer. And it turns out we just got the wrong answer. And that's because it's trying to do exact matching, and it's assuming certain things about the data structure and doing that. And so you can very often get a wrong answer if you don't include that last argument of false. Again, we'll get into the specifics of that a little bit later in another video. So we've used our Vlookup. We've gotten back an important piece of information. Now we can change our Vlookup if we want, right? And we can look up based on some other value. For example, if we want to look up based on name, we can drag our array to where now we're looking up in the first column based on name. Well, there's nobody's name that is 76352, so we get that NA error. If instead we change this to Bill, now we get a reference there, and we stop and think, well, what happened here? Well, let's use our F2 to get into our function and look at it. All right, we're looking for Bill. We should be able to find Bill, so that's probably not the problem. We're looking in C7 to F12, okay, and we're looking for the fifth column. There is no fifth column, right? There's only 4 columns in this array, and so that's where our reference error is coming in. We need to actually adjust this to be back to 4, and now we see that Bill is late on his loan. So a reference error usually says you're trying to reference some cell that does not exist in the array. The hashtag NA error says we can't find what you're looking for. And the value error usually means there's something wrong with how you've set up the function. So in this case, we've rebuilt the VLOOKUP to work on names. We could also use it on borrower IDs. What we can't do with VLOOKUP, and one of the big weaknesses of it, is we can't look up the borrower ID based on the name, meaning we can't look left. Right? We can only ever look right in our table array because we always assume that that first column has the lookup value in it. And as a result, we can't look up from name to borrower ID. And so in the past, people have resorted to tricks like this, where you just copy your borrower ID and you create a copy of it at the end. And if we want to do that, well, now we can actually go through and we can redo our VLOOKUP. Right? We can expand it. Instead of going from F, we can go to G. Now we can get our fifth column that now exists. And we see that the borrower ID is 43237. Again, it's not a currency, but it is that 43237 number. All right, so that's the weakness of VLOOKUP, is it really can't look left. It can only look right. You don't want to have to do this trick with the data, and that's really why XLOOKUP is going to be a lot better function to use going forward. The benefit, though, of VLOOKUP is you don't have to worry about matching the two arrays together, right? You can't have the arrays get skewed from one another because it's locked into the same table array. So there are benefits to VLOOKUP that make it a little bit more robust and less likely to mess up some aspects, but it certainly has weaknesses, and that's why the industry has really gone to XLOOKUP as kind of the way of the future.